I thought escaping to a quiet cottage in the English hills would save my marriage, but from the moment Daniel and I arrived, the house felt wrong, like it was breathing with us. Then he vanished during a storm, and the man who came back wasn't the same. His camera showed him speaking to something in the dark, and soon I was hearing voices, seeing faces that weren't mine. Feathers fell from the ceiling, and mirrors whispered my name. By the time I realized what I'd called through the storm, it was too late. Daniel was gone, yet still watching me. I didn't sleep that night. The storm outside tore through the valley like something alive, hissing through the trees, rattling the windows, whispering against the eaves in voices that didn't sound like wind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face in the upstairs window again, pale, unfamiliar, a shadow behind the curtain that vanished when I turned the flashlight toward it. Daniel had laughed it off, called it reflection or paranoia. He said, "You've been reading too much folklore. This house is probably just playing tricks on you." But when I touched his arm, hoping for reassurance, he'd flinched, like my touch burned. That small recoil haunted me more than the face. It wasn't the house, I realized. It was him. There was something he wasn't saying, something buried in the quiet spaces between his words. I stayed awake, listening to the rain, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, until dawn arrived like a reluctant ghost. By morning, Daniel was gone. His side of the bed was cold, the sheets perfectly smooth, like he hadn't slept at all. I found his camera on the nightstand, still recording. The screen showed him pacing outside the cottage, whispering to someone I couldn't see. "You promised," he was saying, voice low and cracked. "You said she wouldn't know." Then, static. I rewound it 3 times, hoping to catch a glimpse of who he was talking to, but the footage blurred every time the second figure appeared. I tried stepping outside, thinking maybe he'd gone to the hills again, his favorite excuse when he wanted to disappear. But when I opened the front door, a black feather fell from the lintel. Not a crow's feather, longer, almost iridescent, as if from something that shouldn't exist in this kind of world. I pocketed it, even though every instinct told me not to touch it. The village below that morning was half empty. I walked down to the bakery, hoping someone might have seen Daniel, but the woman behind the counter froze when I mentioned his name. "Tall man, dark jacket?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. "He came in yesterday evening, bought a map and a candle, told me he needed to find the other side of the ridge. I told him not to. That place isn't safe after sundown." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she only shook her head, glancing nervously toward the hills. "If he's gone up there, you'd better not follow. The storm opened things again." When I pressed her, "Opened what things?" she just muttered something about thin places and turned away. I left the shop feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's dream, where everyone knew the rules except me. I found Daniel's footprints by the riverbank where the mud was deep and black. They led into the woods to a narrow trail winding toward the ridge. I followed, clutching his camera like a talisman, replaying fragments of the recording as I walked. Every now and then, his voice echoed faintly through the trees, not from the camera, but somewhere ahead of me. He was calling my name, soft at first, then pleading. The sound didn't seem to come from any direction I could pinpoint. Once, I thought I saw him, standing between 2 birch trees, coat whipping in the wind. But when I ran toward him, the figure dissolved into mist. That's when I noticed the same black feathers scattered across the ground, leading deeper into the forest. I should have turned back. Every rational part of me knew it. But something in me, love, guilt, maybe both, pushed me forward. I kept following until the trail opened into a clearing where an old stone arch rose from the earth, half swallowed by roots and moss. The air there didn't feel right. It hummed, like electricity under the skin, or the breath before a scream. I stepped closer, and the world seemed to ripple, trees bending inward, shadows shifting. Inside the arch, the light changed, shimmering like heat on asphalt, though the wind was freezing. I lifted Daniel's camera and hit record, my hands trembling. Through the lens, the scene was different. The clearing was gone, replaced by what looked like another place entirely. Same arch, but behind it stood a dark lake reflecting no sky, only movement beneath the surface. And standing at its edge was Daniel. He was facing away, whispering something into the water. When I called out, the image on the camera turned its head. But it wasn't him. The face was wrong, stretched, almost too symmetrical, and the eyes were a color I've never seen on a human being. I screamed and dropped the camera. When I picked it up again, the screen was black. I don't remember running back, just the blur of trees, the pounding of my heart, and the taste of iron in my mouth. By the time I reached the cottage, the sky had turned the color of bruised lavender, and the windows glowed with candlelight, even though I hadn't lit anything when I left. Inside, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, dripping wet, hands clasped like he'd been praying. His eyes looked hollow, far away. "You shouldn't have gone," he whispered when he saw me. His voice didn't sound like his. There was an echo beneath it, a resonance that made my skin crawl. I tried to touch him, but he stood so fast the chair fell backward. "You don't understand, Lena. It followed me back." Then the candle nearest to him flickered and went out. That night, I locked the bedroom door for the first time since we arrived. Daniel stayed downstairs, pacing for hours, muttering words I couldn't make out. Around midnight, the whispers started again, not from him, but from the walls. They sounded like water, like dozens of voices speaking through the rain. I pressed my hands over my ears and prayed for morning. When dawn came, Daniel was gone again. But this time, the front door was still bolted from the inside. Only his coat remained, draped over the chair by the fireplace. In its pocket, I found another feather, slick and dark, heavier than before. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. I dropped it on the floor, but when it touched the rug, it burned a hole straight through the fabric. The house smelled of smoke and salt. I realized then, this wasn't about Daniel leaving. It was about something trying to take his place. When I first saw the cottage, it felt like the hills themselves had built it, as if the stone walls had simply grown out of the earth, patient and stubborn. It stood alone on a slope in Cumbria. The roof dipped slightly under years of rain, and the chimney curled a thin line of smoke into the cold sky. The air smelled of wet moss and sheep wool, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, soft, lonely, almost apologetic. Daniel was already out of the taxi, camera in hand, his boots crunching over gravel like he'd been here all his life. That was Daniel, always the explorer, the storyteller, the man who never stayed still enough for silence to find him. I followed behind, tugging at my coat, dragging the suitcase wheels through puddles that reflected gray clouds. I wanted to tell him that this place, this damp, forgotten corner of England, felt too far from everything. But when I looked at him, standing there with his camera angled toward the hills, I stopped. He was smiling again. I hadn't seen that smile in months. Maybe that was enough reason to stay quiet. Inside, the cottage smelled like pine and old books. The landlord, a cheerful woman named Margaret, handed us the keys and a folder of local attractions. Her accent was thick, and her laugh echoed in the beams. Daniel kept nodding as she explained the nearest town, but I could tell he wasn't listening. His eyes were darting around, scanning the walls, the windows, the play of light on the old furniture. Every room was a possible shot for his new documentary, The Distance Between Mountains. a film he'd been dreaming about since last year, about solitude, healing, and the quiet resilience of forgotten landscapes. He called it Our Project, though I never really understood what part of it belonged to me. He wanted me here, he'd said, because I balanced him. I think what he really meant was I filled the silences when they got too heavy. When Margaret's car disappeared down the hill, Daniel turned to me, camera still in hand, and said, "Feels like peace, doesn't it?" I smiled, because that's what wives do when they can't say what they mean. Peace wasn't what I felt. It was more like being inside a painting you couldn't step out of. Beautiful, but trapped. The first few days were easy enough. Daniel woke before sunrise, chasing the soft light that pooled over the hills. I'd hear him moving quietly through the kitchen, the kettle clicking, the door creaking open, then silence except for the sound of rain against the roof. I'd lie there, eyes half open, listening to the rhythm of the wind. He said he was filming the soul of the valley, which I assumed meant hours of fog and sheep and stones. I stayed inside mostly, writing in my journal, half out of habit, half to convince myself I was still part of his world. He'd come back around noon, soaked and exhilarated, talking about shots of eternity and the way light breaks through grief. I used to love the way he spoke, like life was a film and we were its only characters. But lately, his voice felt like it was drifting further away. Sometimes I'd ask simple things, like what he wanted for dinner or whether he checked his email, and he'd just nod absently, already somewhere else in his mind. I wondered if he even noticed how quiet I'd become. Or maybe he liked me quieter. Maybe quiet suited him now. On the fourth day, the translator arrived. Her name was Clara, mid-20s, soft curls, kind face, the kind of calm that draws everyone in. Daniel said she was from Manchester, hired by the local trust to help him interview farmers and gather oral histories. I wasn't expecting anyone so effortless. She wore a yellow raincoat and carried a notebook tied with ribbon. When Daniel introduced us, she smiled and said, "You must be Elena. He talks about you all the time." I remember laughing politely, the way women do when they're trying not to examine the sentence too closely. For the rest of the afternoon, they planned routes and shot lists at the kitchen table, while I made tea. Her laughter echoed in the beams, familiar but foreign. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just tired or jealous of their shared excitement. But when Daniel called her Claire Bear, without realizing I was still in the room, something inside me cracked, quiet and invisible, like frost splitting a branch. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving a thick silence pressed against the windows. I got up, padded across the cold floor, and looked outside. The valley was soaked in moonlight, the hills shining pale and endless. Daniel's camera was sitting on the table, the red light blinking faintly, charging. I don't know why I did it, maybe just curiosity or maybe a small act of self-preservation, but I picked it up and scrolled through the footage. Most of it was landscapes, water flowing over stones, sheep grazing, clouds tumbling down the slopes. Then there was a clip labeled Private. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed play. The screen filled with Clara's face, laughing, rain dripping from her hair, as Daniel's voice off camera said softly, "Don't move, you're perfect." My stomach turned. The sound of his voice, gentle, intimate, didn't belong to me anymore. I switched it off before I could see more. The red light blinked again, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time since we'd arrived, the silence felt suffocating. In the morning, I made coffee like nothing had happened. Daniel came in humming, cheeks flushed from the cold, camera already in his hand. He kissed my forehead lightly, the kind of habitual gesture that means nothing but looks like everything. He asked me if I was okay. I nodded. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled the cup. He didn't notice. He was already talking about how the fog was cinematic today and how he wanted to shoot Clara reading poetry by the stream. Poetry. That was new. I wondered if he ever realized I used to write. Before him. Before us. before life turned into scenes and edits and monologues. I watched him walk out the door, his figure disappearing into the mist, and thought, how strange it is to lose someone who still sleeps beside you. That afternoon, I walked alone down to the edge of the valley. The grass was slick, and the air tasted like salt and steel. There was a small bench overlooking the water, half hidden by gorse bushes. I sat there for a long time, watching the ripples spread across the lake. The hills looked eternal, patient witnesses to small human tragedies. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed marriage meant safety, who thought love was something you could fix by traveling somewhere beautiful. But beauty doesn't heal distance, it just disguises it. Behind me, the cottage chimney puffed smoke into the gray sky. Somewhere in those walls, Daniel's voice would be echoing again, capturing moments, chasing meaning, filming everything except the truth. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered into the wind, maybe this time I'll start filming too. The morning after I watched that video, the air outside felt heavier, almost metallic, as if the rain had left something poisonous behind. The hills looked pale, drained of color, and the sky stretched like wet linen, thin and unforgiving. I woke up before Daniel for once. He was turned away from me, breathing slow and steady, his arm hanging off the side of the bed. I stared at his hand, at the wedding band glinting faintly in the dim light. For 7 years, that ring had meant something. Now it just looked like a piece of metal that didn't know when to let go. Downstairs, the kettle screamed as I poured water into my mug, but the sound didn't fill the silence. Nothing could. I kept seeing her face, Clara's face, on his screen, laughing, framed in that golden rain. It wasn't jealousy that burned through me. It was grief, cold and quiet, like standing on a frozen lake and hearing the first crack beneath your feet. I could have confronted him that morning. I could have said, I saw the footage, but I didn't. Instead, I told myself that evidence means nothing without context, that maybe there was some artistic explanation. Love makes you invent reasons to stay blind. Clara arrived just before noon, her raincoat bridlet in the sky. Daniel greeted her with the warmth that had once been mine. They set up cameras outside, talking in hushed tones, the kind of soft rhythm that intimacy naturally finds. I sat by the window, pretending to read, though the words on the page blurred into rivers. Occasionally, Daniel would look toward the house, maybe to check if I was watching, maybe not. At one point, Clara tripped on a root, laughing as Daniel reached to steady her. His hand lingered longer than it should have. I felt the air leave my lungs, like something had pressed down on my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just noted it, the small details, the ones you only see when your heart's already broken. The next day, the same thing, and the next. Daniel's days became longer, his evenings shorter. Sometimes he'd come back after midnight smelling faintly of bonfire and lavender shampoo. Clara's teaching me the locals' folklore, he said once. They believe mist carries secrets. I smiled because I didn't know how to say, I think it already has. After a week, I started keeping track of things. Not because I planned to use them, at least not then, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the distance. I wrote down the times he left, the texts that came at odd hours, the receipts I found in his coat pocket from the inn down the road. I began checking his camera cards too, not out of spite, but self-defense. Most nights he transferred footage to his laptop before bed. I'd wait until he was asleep, then copy the folders onto a USB drive I kept hidden in the lining of my coat. The files were like diary entries written in light, endless shots of fields, water, and mist, punctuated by moments that made my stomach twist. Clara's hair caught by the wind, her face framed by sunlight, her voice calling his name. It wasn't what they showed that hurt the most. It was what they didn't need to say. The way he filmed her was the way he used to look at me before our love turned into a production schedule. I told myself I was gathering evidence, but really, I was archiving a ghost. By the 10th day, the cottage felt haunted. Not by spirits, but by the weight of unspoken things. The air hummed differently when Daniel walked into a room. He'd stop mid-sentence when I appeared, or switch tabs on his laptop too quickly. Once, he came home humming an old Fleetwood Mac song, and I caught the faintest trace of perfume that wasn't mine. I could have called him out right there, could have thrown the words like knives across the table, but something inside me refused. Maybe I wanted to see how far he'd go before guilt made him turn back. Or maybe I wanted to collect every last fragment of betrayal until I had a full mosaic, something undeniable, something final. That night, while he edited footage in the next room, I went for a walk. The mist had settled thick over the valley, erasing the world a few feet ahead. Every step felt like walking through someone else's dream. I reached the lake, where the water was still enough to mirror the sky. My reflection looked unfamiliar, older, hollow-eyed, the versions of myself I used to fear becoming. I whispered into the fog, "If I disappear here, would he even notice?" The next morning, Daniel was gone before dawn. I found a note on the table, written in his quick, restless handwriting. Heading to town with Clara. Interview at the cafe. Don't wait up. There was no love you, no see you later, not even his usual doodle of a mountain. Just the note, casual, transactional, like a colleague's reminder. Something inside me shifted then. A small click of understanding. Love doesn't die all at once. It fades like mist, slowly, invisibly, until one day there's nothing left to hold. I spent the morning cleaning the house for no reason, scrubbing dishes that weren't dirty, folding laundry that didn't exist. Around noon, I walked down to the village to clear my head. The locals, warm and unbothered, greeted me with easy smiles. One woman behind the bakery counter mentioned seeing Daniel and that sweet girl filming by the river. "They make such a lovely pair," she said. I nodded, thanked her, and walked out before she could see the tears break free. Outside, the rain had started again, light but relentless. Every drop felt like a truth I could no longer ignore. When I got back to the cottage, Daniel was sitting by the fireplace, laptop open, humming to himself. He looked up when I walked in, like nothing in the world had changed. "You were out long," he said, almost teasing. I wanted to scream that he had no right to ask me anything. Instead, I hung my coat, poured wine, and sat opposite him. He started showing me clips from his day. Clara interviewing a farmer, a child feeding sheep, the river glinting under late sunlight. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. He smiled, proud, like a boy showing off a drawing to his teacher. "You really think so?" he asked. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's cinematic." He laughed softly, unaware that the word had already become a curse. Later that night, when he had fallen asleep on the couch, I copied his new footage to my drive again. One clip caught my eye. Clara's reflection in the cafe window, Daniel's face faintly visible behind her. They were looking at each other, unaware the camera was still recording. The look between them wasn't dramatic or lustful, just familiar, comfortable, intimate in its ordinariness. That's how love dies. Not with fireworks, but with comfort misplaced. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how people become ghosts in their own lives. You start by losing little things, shared jokes, morning kisses, the sound of someone saying your name like it matters. And then one day, you realize the person standing beside you is no longer the same, and neither are you. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the mist rise from the valley like smoke. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I didn't want to talk or cry or confront. I just wanted to watch it all. The mist, the lies, the silence, until the picture was complete. Maybe that's why I didn't delete the files or throw away the drive. Maybe that's why I didn't pack my bags. Because deep down, I knew this story wasn't over yet. It was still unfolding, quietly, frame by frame. And one day soon, I'd need every single piece of it. By the time I realized Daniel wasn't coming back, the house had already begun to change. The mirrors no longer showed my reflection. Instead, they shimmered faintly, like windows into somewhere damp and shifting. The smell of salt water lingered in the air, stronger each day, though we were miles from the coast. Every time I tried to light a candle, the flame bent toward the window, as if drawn to something outside. I told myself it was grief, that I was imagining things because I couldn't handle the silence. But silence doesn't hum. It doesn't breathe in rhythm with your pulse. I started hearing footsteps upstairs at night, slow and deliberate, pausing every few seconds, as though someone were listening back. Once I called out, "Daniel?" and the footsteps stopped. Then, from the top of the stairs, his voice answered, soft, distant, and wrong. "Come here, Lena. It's cold." I didn't move. I just stood in the kitchen, clutching a knife I didn't remember picking up. My heart was hammering so hard it drowned out the wind. I whispered, "Where are you?" And his voice came again, closer now. "Upstairs." But I could see the shadows under the bedroom door, and they weren't moving like feet. They were too fluid, stretching, curling up the wall like smoke. I backed toward the front door, fumbling for my phone, but there was no signal. I thought about running to the village, but something, maybe the part of me still hoping, made me stay. I whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years and stepped toward the stairs. Each one groaned under my weight like the house was warning me. When I reached the landing, the air turned heavy, wet, almost alive. The bedroom door stood open now, though I was sure it had been closed. Inside, the window was wide, curtains blowing inward. And there, in the middle of the floor, lay Daniel's camera. It was still recording. I pressed play. The footage showed me, sleeping, turning, whispering in my dreams. And beside the bed, Daniel, or something wearing his shape, watching me. His face flickered every few seconds, one frame human, the next stretched and blurred like the lens couldn't decide what it was seeing. "She doesn't remember," he said in the recording. "She still thinks I'm me." Then another voice answered, softer, ancient, echoing from somewhere beyond the frame. "She won't for long. When she does, she'll have to choose." I threw the camera against the wall. The screen cracked, but the voices didn't stop. They leaked into the room, whispering around me. "She'll have to choose." I didn't know what that meant until I looked out the window. Down by the riverbank, two figures stood side by side. Both looked like Daniel. Both were staring up at me. The first one lifted a hand, pleading. The second just smiled. Something inside me broke then, not from fear, but from understanding. I ran downstairs, barefoot, rain slashing against the windows, and tore open the door. The cold hit me like a wall. The river had risen overnight, swollen and fast, its surface boiling under the storm. Both Daniels stood at the far end of the bridge, their coats whipping in the wind. "Lena," the one on the left called. His voice was ragged, human, desperate. "It's me. You have to believe me." The one on the right smiled wider. "He's lying. You've always known it wasn't really him that came back." My mind spun. Their eyes were identical. The same hazel flecked with gold, the same crease by the left brow. But when lightning split the sky, I saw it. The shadow beneath the one on the right, stretching far too long, moving even when he stood still. I took a step forward, soaked, shaking. I shouted over the wind, "If you're him, tell me what you said when we first saw the cottage." The left one blinked, thinking. "You said it looked like a postcard, and I told you that it looked too perfect to be real," I finished for him. His shoulders dropped in relief. The other one's smile faltered. The river roared louder, like it understood what was coming. The shadow thing took a step toward us, its form unraveling, skin slipping like fabric, revealing something dark beneath. The real Daniel grabbed my arm. "Don't look," he whispered. "Just run." But the thing spoke again, and its voice was mine. "You don't have to be afraid, Lena. You wanted him to come back. You called for him. We only answered." And suddenly, I remembered the night he disappeared, how I'd stood at the window whispering into the storm, "Please bring him back." I thought I was praying. I was wrong. I had invited it in. The creature lunged, and the world became noise and water and light. I don't remember falling, only the sound of Daniel's scream as he shoved me backward, the river swallowing him whole. I think I hit a rock, or maybe the current just carried me. But when I woke, it was morning. The storm was gone. The cottage stood silent on the hill, smoke curling gently from the chimney, as if nothing had happened. My clothes were dry, my body was unhurt. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I saw the black feather resting on my chest. It pulsed once, faintly, and then turned to ash. I ran inside, calling Daniel's name, tearing through every room, but the house was empty. No footprints, no camera, no sound. Only the faint humming from the walls remained. And then the kitchen window reflected faintly. Behind me, I saw his face, smiling, waiting. I didn't stay. I packed what I could and left before sunset, driving until the hills gave way to city lights and the radio finally found a station that wasn't just static. I told myself I'd never go back, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the river. Sometimes I dream of the arch, the one in the clearing, and I see Daniel standing on the other side, hand raised, waiting for me to cross. And each time I wake with the taste of salt in my mouth, the smell of rain in my hair, and the faint echo of his voice saying, "It's awake now." Maybe it never left that house, or maybe it followed me. Like the distance between us isn't measured in miles anymore, but in the thinness of whatever separates one world from the next.